What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave, and today I have got a deck list that might be the most excited I've been about a deck list in set 5 at all. I love deck lists, love building decks. It's one of my favorite things. I've been doing it for 20 plus years since I played Magic way back in the day, and it has always been one of my favorite things. You can ask anybody who I played Magic with. I had a different deck every couple weeks. I love building decks, honestly to my detriment sometimes, because in some instances it leads me to playing decks that aren't super meta and maybe don't win tournaments, but they are always a lot of fun. And when it comes to those big set championships, generally I'm more inside of the meta. This is something that I think is becoming meta defining, the deck that we're going to talk about today. I don't know if it's going to be the best deck around, but the deck is a lot of fun to play, and it can certainly surprise your opponent when they don't know what your strategy is. A big shout out to our Patreons who make the giveaways on the channel possible. You guys are the real MVPs of the channel, and definitely stick around for 2,000 subscribers. We're coming up on it quick. We're only a few hundred away right now, so if you haven't subbed, now is a great time to do so, because when we hit 2,000 subscribers, we're going to be giving away a booster box, and we're just generally going to have a lot more fun content coming at you. So if you're enjoying the content, subscribes are greatly appreciated. Like, ring the bell, all that stuff. You guys know what to do. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into talking about the secret cow level. So the first cow in the deck, and the first card in the deck, is going to be Clarabelle, Clumsy Guest, 1/2, Quest for 1. When you play this character, you may pay 2 to banish chosen item. Honestly, a fantastic ability on a 1-drop. Obviously, it's not something that's going to be happening turn 1, but it makes this 1-drop not a dead draw in a lot of games when you're drawing them further in. It is a great way to counter those Sleepy Sleuths. It is a great way to counter those Sleepy's Flutes. I've seen Lantern come back in some instances when it comes to Amber, and obviously those Sapphire decks that are item heavy. Clarabelle is going to be a great way to slow them down. She has parity with Fishbone Quill, even with her ability. As soon as they play that Fishbone Quill, you're able to answer it with a Clarabelle. Next up, and you'll see a little bit further into the deck why we are playing this card, we have 3 ice blocks, 1 cost, uninkable. Tap it, chosen character gets -1 attack. Great way to just get favorable trades in general, but synergizes nicely with some of the other stuff we are working with here. Next up, we do have 2 cost Mother Gothels. This is a new card from the new set. Card I think is pretty good, honestly. Generally as a shift line, not so much for the ability, although when it is relevant in the late game, she can be good for the ability too. But she is a 2 cost inkable 1/3 character who quests for 1. When you play this character, you may pay her kind of kicker cost, if you're familiar with Magic, of 3 to return chosen character to their player's hand. So costs a little bit less than a Genie, is inkable, but it's not going to have a stat line like Genie, and it's not going to be evasive, but it can definitely help you with tempo going into those later turns of the game. Then we have 4 Tipos, a card that is generally bad and like every other deck is a worse choice as a way to get ink into the inkwell, but in this deck it synergizes very nicely. He is a 2 cost 1/2 quest for 1, and when you play this character, you may put a card from your hand into your inkwell face down and exerted. It is worth noting, for those of you who don't know, that card does not have to be inkable. It is a card, you are not revealing it. Only when you have to reveal it, or a card says you may ink an additional card during this turn, is it a requirement for it to be inkable. Next up, we are on 3 Ursula Deceivers. I think this card is still very good, particularly in the mid to late game, to deal with things like Be Prepared and Grab Your Swords, but she is a 1/3 for 2 inkable, quest for 1, and when you play her, you're going to get to look at your opponent's hand, which that in and of itself, even in the early game, can be really good because you have an idea of what kind of play line your opponent's on, and then you're going to be able to choose a song card from it, and they discard it. A lot of people playing songs right now, so getting value out of Ursula Deceiver is not hard. She is also going to be a way to sing our 2 cost songs, like the one Seldom All They Seem in the deck. Again, I mentioned being able to give characters minus attack is going to be pertinent to other things we are playing in the deck, and this is a way to do that. It is a 2 cost song, so you can sing it with something like Ursula or some of the other 2 cost characters that we have in this deck, or anything that costs more than 2, and chosen character is going to get -3 during this turn. Next up, I went with 3 of these instead of 4 because it's just not always good, and that is Chicha, a 2 cost uninkable 2/1 character who quests for 1. It does have support and could boost up your other characters for an attack, which definitely isn't irrelevant. This particular color combination does have a tendency to struggle in the attack department, and during your turn, this is why we're playing her, when you put a card into your inkwell, if it's the second card you've put into your inkwell this turn, you can draw a card. So that is only going to trigger once per turn. It doesn't trigger for the third ink or anything like that. It's not each additional ink beyond the first, but drawing that extra card per turn can definitely be really relevant, especially when you're not playing some of the other typical Sapphire draw cards. Then another 2-cost song for these guys to sing. We do have One Jump Ahead, obviously fantastic synergy with Chicha or Chica, I think it's Chicha. It is going to be a singable card, so 2-cost song, uninkable, but you're going to go ahead and put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down and exerted. This is kind of a mixed bag. It's a blessing and a curse. The song aspect works very nicely with this deck, so I think it's super worth having in here. But as people have learned with One Jump Ahead, sometimes you ink cards you don't want to ink because you don't actually get to see what you're inking. And not only have you inked something maybe you wouldn't have wanted to ink, but you don't know about it until the game is over. One Jump Ahead, blessing and a curse, but still a card that I think is super meta relevant, something I wish I got foils of. Then moving over to the 3-drop slot, we do have 2 of the 3-cost Clarabelle, another cow in our deck, Contented Wallflower, 2/3 for 1. She's mainly here for that ability because card draw is so very relevant in the current meta, and people are drawing cards like crazy in everything except for aggro, so she's maybe inking the inkwell in the aggro matchup. But when you play this character, if an opponent has more cards in their hand than you may draw a card. Another way to get that second ink in the inkwell, and another card that synergizes beautifully on curve with Chicha. Chicha coming down on 2, Fishbone Quill coming down on 3, is going to be this, as I just said, Fishbone Quill, 3-cost inkable. Tap it, put any card from your hand into your inkwell face down, not exerted, so you're putting it into your inkwell, able to use right away, and it's any card. So again, this is another instance of it not having to be inkable. Obviously it is an item, there's a lot of item hate in the meta right now, so people may be dealing with your Fishbone Quills, but unlike some of the other Sapphire decks, it isn't 100% necessary to your game plan here. Next up we have You're Welcome, another song, 4-cost inkable, action song, shuffle chosen character in item or location into the player's deck. That player draws 2 cards. Crazy that it has this much variety in what it can do. You heard me correctly when I said shuffle chosen character, item, or location. So this is going to go ahead and deal with really anything you don't want to deal with on your opponent's side of the board. They have a location giving you a hard time, you're welcome. It's back in your deck, draw 2 cards. If they have a lucky dime or something like that giving you a hard time, you're welcome. It's back in your deck, draw 2 cards. Tamatoa, back in your deck, draw 2 cards. You're welcome, just crazy versatile card. The fact that this is an uncommon is honestly kind of crazy to me. I get why they made an enchanted of this. Very good card. And it's a song, so it's singable, which is crazy. And one of the reasons we are so focused on songs in this deck is our 4-cost inkable, The Muses. 2/4 quest for 1, does have ward, so as long as you're not questing in with it, it's extremely difficult for your opponent to get off of the board. And whenever you play a song, you may return chosen character with 2 attack or less to their player's hand, so now you get why we're playing those ice blocks, playing that Seldom Always Seem. Seldom Always Seem is very funny with this card. It is super situational, which is why we're only on one of them, but if you can get the Muses down, you could Seldom Always Seem a Tamatoa back into their hand with the Muses, because you give it -3, goes to having 2 attack, and then you trigger the Muses ability to go ahead and bounce as their hand. The only thing it's really not going to hit is like Maui and Maleficent Dragon. Most everything that I can think of is going to have 5 attack or less, and Seldom Always Seem would potentially be able to bounce it, but you can bounce those things that do have 2 attack or less anytime you play a song, and you have those ice blocks to further take advantage of bouncing characters that maybe have more than 2 attack. Then next up, also in the 4-drop slot, I've seen a lot of deck lists on 4 of these. I think 3 of them is the way to go, just because it's another card that's super situational in my opinion. It is something that can come out and just die right away before it ever does anything for you, and you don't really want to play it early for its ink ramp ability, because again, it's going to be questing for 1, and it's just going to be super high risk being on the board. But we do have 4-cost inkable, Bell, strange but special, 2/4 stat line, quest for 1. However, if you have 10 or more cards in your inkwell, she quests for +4, so that's not 4, she quests for 5 total, and during your turn you may put an additional card from your hand into your inkwell face down. It is worth noting, Belle, the way she is worded, that card does have to be inkable and you do have to reveal it. So keep that in mind when it comes to Belle. Typically you're not going to be taking advantage of that ability unless you're already on turn 10 or a turn far enough in that you have 10 ink and are able to take advantage of her quest for 5, or take advantage of her having 5 lore on her immediately with something like Lucky Dime. Next up in the 5-drop slot, jumping over to 5 drops, we have We Don't Talk About Bruno, 5 cost inkable. If you've been around for my box breaks for a while, if you watch my Ursula's Return box breaks, you may know I cracked and enchanted We Don't Talk About Bruno. It is going to be singable by any character with a cost 5 and return chosen character to their player's hand, then that player discards a card at random. So if they don't have any other cards in their hand, it is just straight up removal. If they do have other cards in their hand, it's going to be at random, so it could be a surprise to both of you what they end up discarding. And the fact that it's a song, you may also potentially be able to bounce them into their hand with muses. Then next up, another 5 cost song. We do have 3 Let It Goes, action song, 5 cost inkable, and it's got the ability put chosen character into their player's inkwell face down and exerted. So this is another instance, kind of like Your Welcome, where you're going to be able to get rid of pretty much any character. Your Welcome has a little more versatility, but it does have the drawback of letting them draw 2, whereas Let It Go, no drawback other than they're getting 1 ink off of it, which typically isn't going to matter because you're generally going to be pretty far ahead of them on ink. The only card in the 6-drop slot and a way to sing some of those bigger songs is going to be Mother Gothel, Unwavering Schemer, 4/6, quest for 2, shifts for 4 onto those small Gothels we have in the deck, and when you play this character, each opponent chooses one of their characters and returns it to their hand. So kind of like Tremaine, so it does get around Ward. Your opponent's going to be choosing which character they do want to return to their hand, so kind of a mixed bag with that. If they only have one character on the board, like Tomato or something like that, in that Sapphire matchup, super good. Obviously, it just kind of acts like targeted removal at that point. However, if they don't have just one character out, they have like a small 1-cost character that isn't really going to matter, you may not be getting a ton of value off of her. Maybe looking at going ahead and inking her instead, or just using her for the fact that she's a 4-stick stat line that quests for 2. Then the card the deck is built around, and the card that I thought was going to prevent me from building this deck, is going to be Clarabelle, Light on Her Hooves, 7 cost inkable, 5/6 stat line, quest for 2, and at the end of your turn, if chosen opponent has more cards in their hand than you, you may draw cards until you have as many cards as they do. Fantastic ability. You're going to be inking out your hand incredibly quickly and just drawing cards equal to the amount of cards they have in their hand total in most instances. It also makes Your Welcome a much better card than it would be otherwise, because you are letting your opponent draw those 2 cards, but then you're also going to draw 2 cards to get parity with them, so you're really not giving them any great advantage. And like I mentioned, she is going to quest for 2, so just a fantastic card. Fun, quick little story about Clarabelle. I had 2 of these. I'd opened a case and a trove, and I did a draft. I opened one in draft when they were like $8 and took it just because it was a legendary. Was happy to find out the following week that she is like a $30 card. She shot up pretty quick there, and I opened one in my case, so I had 2 total. Decided against my better judgment to buy a trove when I was at League last Sunday, and I actually opened 2 Clarabelles in the trove, a legendary Arthur and a foil Kuzco super rare, which is like a $5 or $6 super rare. Also in my pack from League, I opened a legendary Robin Hood, so it was a banger day for openings. Wish I had that stuff on video, but yeah, got a foil and non-foil Clarabelle in my trove. But 5/6, quest for 2, gives you a ton of cards in your hand, shifts for 5. Fantastic card. Getting down into the last few cards of the deck, we do have 2 Lucky Dimes, 7 cost, uninkable item, pay 2 and exert it, choose a character of yours and gain lore equal to their lore. Obviously, best case scenario, you have this, 10 ink and Belle in your hand. You're going to be able to go ahead and get Belle to turn down either before this or the turn after. You're activate on something the turn that it comes into play and gain that 5 lore when Belle's out. So Lucky Dime, pretty good in the deck. It's also very good with another card we're playing. We'll talk about it in a second. Second to last cards in this deck, we are on 3 Under the Sea, another action song, 8 cost, uninkable, Sing Together 8 though, so this is a Sing Together mechanic, something I don't think we got any of in set 5. Did they decide that Sing Together was too broken? Who knows? But you're going to put all opposing characters with 2 or less attack on the bottom of their player's deck in any order. This is again where Seldom All They Seem could be really good, or just having those ice blocks out into play can be really good. Under the Sea is not inkable, but in this deck you're playing stuff like Fishbone Quill and Tipo, which will potentially let you ink this in instances where it's not helping you. And the last card in the deck, and this is only a 2 of in this deck, I think in most standard Sapphire decks they're only playing 3 of these anyway, but it's going to be Tamatoa So Shiny, 8 cost, inkable character, 5/8 stat line, quest for 1. When you play this character and whenever he quests, you're going to be able to go ahead and return an item from your discard to your hand. So if you are dealing with item removal from your opponent, once Tamatoa is hitting the board, you're going to be able to go ahead and start getting those items back, and for every item you get back and put onto the board, you are going to be adding an additional point of lore to Tamatoa. So if you have 4 or 5 items out, he's questing for potentially 5 or 6. If you have Lucky Dime out, you're able to take advantage of that 2 times and create giant lore swings, just like any other Sapphire deck. So Tamatoa is fantastic. That is the extent of the deck list. I think it's really good. From play testing, it seems fairly competitive. I was very fortunate to open expensive cards that go into it, so I was able to build it sooner than later and talk about it on the channel. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this deck below. I think it's a really interesting new color combination. It's really cool to me to see Sapphire Emerald be a relevant combination of inks in the meta, not only just in like a fun deck, but in a deck that I think is really meta relevant in this Clarabelle Secret Cow level deck. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in the comments below, but remember to like the video if you enjoyed the video, dislike it if you disliked it. I suppose I'd rather you didn't, but you know, make your choices, and drop a comment below. And when you see those toys, video games, and awesome cold foil cows off in the distance, remember, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.